Imagine for a moment a world where half of the population is told they cannot own property, cannot vote, cannot choose whom to marry or whether to marry at all, cannot inherit, cannot testify in court with the same weight as other half, cannot learn to read. You don't have to imagine it, because for most of the human history, this was the reality for women in virtually every corner of our planet. But here's what's fascinating and disturbing. Patriarchy didn't look the same everywhere. It adapted, it morphed, it found different jurisdictions in different cultures, and yet somehow it achieved the same result: the systematic subordination of half of humanity. Today, we are going to trace this pattern across continents and centuries. Not because the story is simple, it isn't, but because understanding how deeply these roots run help us comprehend why the remnants still shape our world today. Let's start with a question. Was it always this way? The archaeological evidence suggests no. Early human societies have signs of relative gender equality. But somewhere between the agricultural revolution and the rise of civilizations, something shifted. Property became important, inheritance became critical, and suddenly, controlling women's sexuality and reproduction became a matter of economic and political power. By the time we see written law codes, Hammurabi's code in Mesopotamia around 1750 BC, patriarchy is already fully formed. But why? Why did societies from China to Peru, from Egypt to Scandinavia, independently arrive at similar systems of male dominance? Let's travel to the Middle East, where three major world religions were born, and where patriarchy found perhaps the most enduring legal frameworks. In the Talmudic period, women were explicitly excluded from religious authority and legal testimony was weighted against them. When Islam emerged in the 7th century, it actually introduced reforms. Women gained inheritance rights. Even if half of what men received, they could own property and initiate divorce under certain conditions. But interpretations hardened over centuries. By the medieval period, practices like strict veiling and gender segregation, which weren't originally in the Quran, became standard in many regions. What's crucial to understand is that religious texts were interpreted by men in patriarchal societies, who then used those interpretations to justify the same quo, the same pattern repeated across faiths. Hey, just a little break from the interesting video you're watching right now. A lot of viewers do not subscribe the channel and even do not care to leave a like or share. I would like to request you to do that, since I have been pursuing YouTube since 2-3 months now, and I would really love some support and engagement from the viewers. Thank you so much. Now to Europe, where the story gets particularly ironic. Under Roman law, women were perpetual minors. They needed male guardians their entire lives: father, husband, or an appointed male relative. They couldn't make contracts, appear in the court, or control their property. Christianity, despite Jesus' relatively egalitarian treatment of women, quickly absorbed Roman patriarchal structures. But here's where it gets fascinating. That European Enlightenment, that great age of reason and individual rights, somehow forced about half the population. John Locke wrote eloquently about natural rights and freedom, while supporting laws that gave husbands complete control over wives. Rousseau penned treatises on liberties and devoted an entire chapter to explaining why women should be educated only to please men. The French Revolution declared liberty, equality, fraternity, and when Olympe de Gouges wrote a Declaration of Rights of Women in 1971, she was guillotined. The men who invited modern democracy couldn't imagine women in it. Cross the world to India, where patriarchy intersected with another massive system of oppression: caste. Ancient Hindu texts contained both empowering and restrictive views of women. But by the medieval period, practices like child marriages, sati, widow burning, and strict parda had become widespread, particularly among the upper caste. Women couldn't inherit property. Widows and even child widows were expected to live in permanent mourning. Shaved heads, white saris, social death. A woman's value was tied entirely to her role as daughter, wife, or mother. British colonialism added another layer. The British simultaneously criticized Indian patriarchal practices as barbaric, while maintaining equally oppressive laws at home. They reformed some practices like banning sati while reinforcing others through codified personal laws that gave legal weight to most conservative interpretations of religious tradition. The result, Indian women reformers of the 19th century and the 20th century had both indigenous patriarchal and colonial hypocrisy simultaneously. In China, Confucian philosophy created one of the most elaborate patriarchal systems ever devised. The three obediences: obey your father, obey your husband, obey your son. A woman had no independent identity. The four virtues dictated proper behavior, speech, demeanor, and work for women, all oriented towards service. And then there was foot binding. For 1,000 years, from 10th to the 20th century, millions of Chinese girls had their feet systematically broken and bound, creating tiny, deformed feet that made walking painful and running impossible. This wasn't ancient history. This continued well into the late 1900s. Why? Because tiny feet were considered beautiful, because they signaled a family's wealth. You could only bind your daughter's feet if you didn't need her labor in the fields, and because immobilized women couldn't easily escape. In Japan, under the samurai code, a woman could be killed by her husband for adultery or disobedience without legal consequences. In Korea, women weren't allowed to marry after widowhood, while men could have multiple wives and concubines. The pattern repeats: same cultures, different specific practices, same fundamental outcome. Indigenous socialists across America show remarkable diversity in gender relations. Many were matrilineal, some had recognized third gender roles. Then European colonization brought European patriarchy. In the American colonies, under coverture law imported from England, married women legally ceased to exist. All property, all earrings, even their children belonged to their husband. A woman couldn't sign a contract, couldn't sue, couldn't be sued. She had no legal identity separate from her husband. The United States declared independence in 1776 with the words, "All men are created equal," and meant exactly that, men. Women couldn't vote until 1920s, and that's just white women. Black women in the South faced voter suppressions decades after. Until 1974, women couldn't get credit cards without a male cosigner. Until 1993, marital rape wasn't illegal in all 50 states. As recently as in the 1960s, women couldn't serve on juries in all states, couldn't attend many universities, couldn't work on certain jobs, and needed husband's permission for birth control. We are not talking about ancient history, we are talking about your grandmother's lifetime. So what do we have to do with this? The story of patriarchy isn't just historical curiosity, it's not just about the past. Every legal system, every cultural norm, every institution we have today was built on this foundation. The laws have changed, in many places dramatically, but the architecture remains. When we talk about gender inequality today, the wage gap, the glass ceiling, the epidemic of violence against women, the underrepresentation in leadership, we are not talking about isolated problems. We are talking about aftershocks of a system that, for thousands of years, was designed to exclude, silence, and control half of humanity. The remarkable thing isn't that inequality persists. The remarkable thing is how much has changed in just the last century. Women's suffrage, legal equality, educational success, economic participation, its fastest large-scale social transformation in human history. But understanding where we came from, understanding this oppression wasn't natural, wasn't inevitable, but was constructed and maintained through law, religion, custom, and force, that understanding is crucial. Because what was constructed can be deconstructed. The story isn't over, it's just finally begun written by all of us.